Today, we're going to take a look at 20 more top hazards associated with the mechanical construction industry. This approach should help you recognize hazards immediately and know what to do to keep yourself and your coworkers safe. We got a lot of territory to cover, so let's get started. Fires from hot work. These occur when the sparks and flames generated by welding, cutting, or brazing ignite flammable or combustible materials. One of the best ways to prevent fires around hot work areas is with good housekeeping. Keep your work area clean and free of flammable and combustible materials. Pay special attention to trash piles, oily or greasy rags, wood dust, and anything else that could ignite easily. It's also a great idea to isolate the ignition source whenever possible with a welding screen, fire blanket, or by doing the work in a separate, non-combustible area. Last, make fire watch part of your daily routine. Finish up the hot work at least 30 minutes before the end of your shift. For that last half hour, watch carefully for smoldering materials. When exposed to ignition sources, flammable liquids become hazardous in a hurry. Make sure they're stored in approved, properly labeled containers with self-closing lids. And if you use them, you need to be 50 feet away from any ignition sources. Like flammable liquids, flammable gases such as acetylene and propane are also a major concern. They're stored in compressed gas cylinders, which, when handled improperly, create a whole set of hazards of their own. Because flammable gases are volatile, it's well worth the reminder. Pay attention to your surroundings. Avoid ignition sources like sparks, slag, flames, or electrical sources. Inspect regulators and torches before each use. Do not use them if they appear damaged. And believe it or not, we're still experiencing injuries from improper handling of compressed gas cylinders. The good news is we can avoid these injuries if we stick to the basics of proper cylinder handling. Keep compressed gas cylinders in a secure, upright position at all times. Close cylinder valves as soon as you're done working. If cylinders don't have knobs to open and close the valves, make sure there are wrenches in place when the valves are open so they can be shut off quickly if needed. Secure the valve caps in place before moving or storing cylinders. And don't forget, even though oxygen isn't flammable, it can rapidly accelerate the rate of combustion. Treat oxygen cylinders the same way that flammable gas cylinders have to be treated. And remember the 20-foot rule. Store compressed gas cylinders at least 20 feet from combustible materials, and store oxygen cylinders at least 20 feet away from fuel gas cylinders, unless there's a 5-foot high or higher, half-hour rated non-combustible barrier between them. Pressure testing piping systems is a frequent requirement in our trade. Here are some basics for safe pressure testing. The safest way to test is by hydrostatic testing, where water is the test medium. Pneumatic testing is another option that uses air or an inert gas, such as nitrogen, as the test medium. It's more hazardous because when failures occur, there is considerably more energy behind them. Also, pneumatic tests with certain gases can, at times, create oxygen-deficient atmospheres. Pneumatic testing should only be done when hydrostatic testing is impractical or could result in contamination or damage to the system, or when it's required by design or engineering specs. Regardless of what type of testing you're doing, always wear a hard hat and safety glasses and never exceed the maximum required test pressure. In some cases, additional protective measures, such as relief valves, may be required. Always check with your supervisor before testing, and do not proceed with any pressure testing unless you have been properly trained. Line breaking, also called line opening, can occur in many areas, such as breaking flanges to install blinds, removing blinds, tie-ins, and hot taps. Before you start any line breaking, check the site-specific line breaking plan, including lockout-tagout procedures, training requirements, steps to ensure the system is clear of substances, and methods for preventing, containing, collecting, and disposing of spilled materials. All valves must be closed and locked and/or tagged out, according to your company's procedures. The pumps must also be de-energized and locked out and/or tagged out, and the system must be depressurized. Initial line breaking should be done so that any spray or spillage occurs away from you and others in the work area. In some cases, initial line breaks require the use of hot suits or acid suits or respirators. Before you start the job, carefully review your company's site-specific plan. Find out what material is being transported in the pipe and check the material safety data sheet to determine what personal protective equipment is needed. And be sure to check with your supervisor if you're not absolutely certain about what's required for safety. Our next two hazards involve electricity. No matter how much we talk about it, many of us still get complacent around it. Our primary exposures to stored electrical energy come in two ways, through use of power tools and through work on electrical circuits. When using any kind of power tool, such as a grinder, drill, or saw, always unplug the cord before you replace parts to prevent accidental startups, which often cause injury. And anytime you're working near exposed live electrical parts, make sure the circuit has been de-energized and carefully follow your company's electrical safety in the workplace procedures. Be very aware of your surroundings when working near overhead power lines with ladders, forklifts, cranes, scaffolds, anything conductive that can make you electricity's easiest path to ground. Use non-conductive ladders and keep your distance. Also, the ground around you can become energized even if you're not the one in direct contact with the power line. For example, you could be walking by a crane. If the crane comes in contact with an overhead power line, you could be electrocuted, even if you're not in direct contact with the crane, simply because the ground can become energized around you. So keep your eyes up, head on a swivel, and communicate with others when working near live power lines. Our next 6 hazards are health hazards, which should never be overlooked. Welding and cutting creates fumes, which can be hazardous if inhaled in large concentrations over a period of time. The bottom line is, you don't want welding and cutting fumes in your lungs. One of the best ways to avoid inhaling fumes is to position your body so the fumes aren't coming directly up into your breathing zone. Position your hood and tuck your chin so the fumes rise up and away from your breathing zone. It's also extremely important to work in a well-ventilated area. Depending on the quality of ventilation in your work area, the kind of welding you're doing, and the materials you're working with, you may need a respirator. If you're not absolutely sure about the air quality in your work area, check with your supervisor before you begin work. Despite the warnings, we still aren't taking enough precautions when it comes to asbestos. The first step to working safely around asbestos is to be aware that all building materials installed before 1980 could contain asbestos. So if you come across pre-1980 building materials such as pipe insulation, ceiling tiles, or floor tiles that crush, crumble, or fall apart easily and send particles into the air, that's your cue to stop work immediately and contact your supervisor. This kind of thing will happen a lot on renovation projects. Once you identify a potential asbestos hazard, report it so it can be abated before work continues. Remember, even trained, experienced workers misidentify asbestos-containing materials from time to time. So never guess. Make sure you know what you're working on. Working around airborne concentrations of asbestos will require additional training. Talk with your supervisor to ensure that your company is qualified to perform this type of work. Lead-based paint is hazardous because if lead is inhaled or ingested, it can stay in your body, causing serious health problems such as kidney damage, reproductive damage, even birth defects. Much of the danger in the mechanical construction industry comes from hot work on surfaces painted with lead-based paint. To protect yourself, watch for tasks such as torch cutting, grinding, or sawing on painted pipes which could emit lead fumes or lead dust from lead-based paint. To avoid the risk, make sure that at least 2 inches of the paint on each side of the area to be heated, cut, or ground is removed with a non-toxic paint remover by a trained, qualified person before you begin work. Remember, lead exposure can be greatly reduced or eliminated by proper ventilation and respiratory protection when needed. Silica can cause health problems if inhaled in significant concentrations. One of the biggest health concerns is a condition called silicosis, where the body forms fibrous tissue in the lungs. The major exposures to silica in our industry are when we're drilling through concrete walls to run pipe or drilling into concrete ceilings to install pipe hangers. For protection, use drills with built-in vacuum collection bags or use the wet method to keep the dust from becoming airborne. Blood-borne pathogens are microorganisms in human blood and body fluid that cause diseases such as hepatitis B and acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. There are 2 times to be especially aware of blood-borne pathogens: when responding to an injury or when working on a site where human fluids might be present, such as healthcare facilities, nursing homes, dental facilities, funeral homes, or wastewater treatment plants. To protect yourself against blood-borne pathogens, follow the Center for Disease Control's universal precautions by always assuming that blood and body fluids are infected. Use the appropriate personal protective equipment: medical exam gloves, safety glasses or goggles, and a surgical mask or face shield that covers the nose and mouth. If you've been exposed to human blood or fluids, immediately wash the area with warm soapy water and inform your supervisor about the exposure. Excessive noise over long periods of time can cause permanent hearing damage. If you don't want to be wearing a hearing aid down the road, you'll want to start paying attention to excessive noise in your work areas. When it's so loud that you can't hear someone speaking in a normal tone 3 feet or less away, you probably need hearing protection. Wear earplugs or earmuffs at the right times, both on and off the job, and you'll probably never need that hearing aid. That covers our health hazards. Now we need to look at 2 temperature extremes: heat and cold. Extreme heat can affect you in several ways, but heat exhaustion and heat stroke are the ones we're most concerned about. Heat exhaustion isn't as dangerous as heat stroke, but it still needs to be dealt with immediately. Signs of heat exhaustion are heavy sweating, pale, clammy skin, weakness, nausea, and headache. Heat stroke is extremely dangerous because the body becomes so hot it can't cool itself. Signs of heat stroke include hot, dry, red skin, a strong pulse, and a complete lack of perspiration. Avoid becoming a victim of heat exhaustion, or worse yet, heat stroke, by staying as cool as possible throughout the workday. Continuously drink plenty of water or other hydrating drinks, and avoid caffeinated drinks, such as caffeinated coffees, teas, and sodas. And take your breaks in a cool place where you can rehydrate comfortably. Also, there are many commercial body coolers around that you can soak with cool water and wear under your hard hat or on the back of your neck. It's a good idea to brush up on your first aid skills in case you discover a coworker with heat exhaustion or heat stroke symptoms. The bottom line is, the victim will need to be cooled down as quickly as possible with shade and cool wet towels or ice packs under their arms and in the groin area. And the second you start to see heat stroke signs, call for immediate emergency medical services and continue to cool the victim. And remember, never try to give an unconscious person anything to drink. Extreme cold can result in frostbite, but even seemingly mild conditions can result in hypothermia. Hypothermia is the condition referring to a drop in body temperature that's well below normal. Frostbite victims in our industry typically suffer from frostbitten toes, fingers, ears, and noses. To avoid frostbite, be sure to dress properly in extremely cold conditions. Wear insulated, waterproof, but breathable work boots, warm, dry gloves, and a warm, dry hat. If you suspect that you have frostbite, resist the urge to rub the affected area, which could permanently damage the skin. Get someplace warm and let the affected area warm naturally. If it doesn't start to warm, remains numb, or starts to swell or blister, get someone to take you for immediate emergency medical treatment. With hypothermia, your core body temperature drops dangerously low. Symptoms include shivering, slow or slurred speech, memory loss, and blue lips. Avoid hypothermia by dressing properly and staying dry and out of the wind as much as possible. Most of your body heat escapes through your head, armpits, and groin. Pay special attention to keeping those areas warm when choosing your clothing for the day. If you start to shiver uncontrollably, get someplace warm until your body temperature returns to normal. And if you run across someone with signs of hypothermia, call for immediate emergency medical services and warm the victim as quickly as possible while waiting for help. The last 4 hazards in this series have to do with falls. Poor lighting will get you every time. With all the potential hazards on a job site, the last thing you need is low visibility. Make sure there's adequate lighting throughout your work area and the walking surfaces throughout the site, such as stairways and walk-through areas. If your work area is not well lit, let your supervisor know immediately. Even though it's tempting, don't use a stairway that's a skeleton frame or where the steps and landings aren't installed. And don't use metal pan landings unless they're filled with wood or another approved method for temporary use, or concrete for permanent structure. Never use stairways or landings until proper fall prevention has been installed, including a guardrail system and handrails. Falls with a scaffold mean you and the scaffold go down together. To prevent this, look the scaffold over carefully each day before you use it, and make sure a competent person has supervised the erection process or inspected the scaffold after erection was completed. No matter what kind of scaffold it is, make sure that the supporting surface is capable of supporting the scaffold with the intended load of workers, materials, and equipment. If the surface is not level, be sure that the scaffold is properly leveled with the appropriate screw jacks or comparable equipment. If it's a mobile scaffold, be sure that the supporting surface is level and free of pits, holes, and obstructions. Be sure to lock the casters before use. Ensure that the height to base width ratio does not exceed 2:1 unless you're certain that the scaffold has met special, nationally recognized stability test requirements. And when you use outrigger frames, make sure they are installed on both sides of the scaffold. Falls from properly erected, stable scaffolds occur too. Many of them occur when climbing to another level or during assembly or disassembly. When we fall from a scaffold, it's often because there was no fall prevention or protection system in place. Make sure there's an adequate system in place, such as a guardrail system or personal fall arrest system in accordance with your company's policy. So there you have it, hazard recognition and protection for another 20 of the top hazards in our industry. The hazards we identified today are still resulting in way too many injuries. Stay alert, follow safe work practices, and you can eliminate these hazards from your workplace. Because quite frankly, these mechanical industry hazards are wearing me out. Do your job safely. Don't make me come back here.